Hey, thanks for checking out Nuts and Bolts with Tone, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about a 6.7 Powerstroke. So the 6.7 Powerstroke is very common to have upper oil pan leaks. Rear main seals too, and the lower oil pan. So you're going to do all this at the same time, and in this video I'm going to guide you through what it takes to do this job. It's quite a long process. And it's very difficult to do it as far as being not in a shop. If you're not in a shop, it's really, the transmission's really heavy. But basically what you're going to notice, the upper oil pan you'll see in this video is quite large. It spans the engine front to rear. And it'll be completely engulfed in oil eventually. It'll just slowly start to trickle down. Your lower oil pan will be completely engulfed in oil. And it'll look like your oil filter housing is leaking. It'll look like all kinds of stuff is leaking. But basically what happens is the upper oil pan, it leaks all the way around, but it really leaks at the back, and it leaks into the bell housing, and it gets on the flex plate, and the flex plate throws it all around. So the whole transmission inside the transmission bell housing is completely engulfed in oil. You'll see in this one, I'll show you how bad it is. The rear engine cover is what you can see. It's about this thick, and it's in between the transmission and the engine. And it'll look like it's leaking. It'll be leaking out of the starter hole. And so what happens is it gets thrown up to the starter, and it runs down the oil filter housing. So the oil filter housing looks like it's leaking. And so I'm gonna talk to you about what it's gonna take to do that job. So to do that job, let me just give you a brief parts list that you're going to need to do this job. And this is based on, I've done a few of them, and this has happened on all of them. So you're going to need Ford silicone. I strongly recommend you get Ford Motorcraft silicone for the 6.7 Powerstroke. There's a specific silicone that it needs. It's not worth taking a chance on using cheap silicone. I've found that when you use silicone not for a specific manufacturer, that it leaks. I've done Toyota timing covers and used universal RTV, and it came back leaking. Do it with Toyota silicone, no leaks. Same thing with Kia, Hyundai. I've done it with all of them. So basically just get yourself the Ford silicone. You don't have to worry about it, and you know it's gonna be done right. You're also, if you wanna do it correctly, you're also gonna need flex plate bolts. They're supposed to be one-time use, and they're 74 foot-pounds. You're going to need a crank sensor cover. It's about this long, it's plastic. And you have to do a rear main seal, this is not for the upper open, this is for the rear main seal. To do a rear main seal in this vehicle, you have to pop the little rubber cover off of the side, and you have to slip it out, and it's what the wire goes through. Then you have to back the bolt off until the crank sensor clears the hole for the rear main. And there's a plastic cover that's about this long that just slides in with the crank sensor, and it pops in place. That is super common to break. Every one I've taken off has broken. You're also going to need an oil filter housing seal. You're going to need oil cooler seals. An oil cooler, if you think it might be leaking or you think there's an issue, replace it while it's off. The coolant hoses, there's two coolant hoses. One of them I strongly recommend you replace. I show you in this video. It actually goes from the front connection of the oil cooler up along the upper oil pan, and it connects to the lower radiator hose. That hose will be completely engulfed in oil, and I strongly recommend you replace it while it's off. The other one, you can replace it if you want. It just goes up to the block. There's really no benefit to replacing it at this time, except for it's halfway disconnected. You're also going to need, if you want to do it correctly, a transmission oil dipstick tube O-ring. You're going to do an oil change. You're going to need coolant, and you're going to need, so the lower oil pan on the older ones, they have a plastic lower oil pan with a plastic drain plug. So those are superseded to a metal pan. If you buy a Dorman, if you go get an aftermarket oil pan, you don't have bolts for it. So you have to go to Ford and get the bolts. If you buy the lower oil pan from Ford, it comes with the bolts. You also need the silicone for that. You need the silicone for that, and you need 4 dabs of silicone on the upper oil pan. And also a rear main seal. Strongly recommend you only use a Motorcraft seal. Now the tools you're going to need for this job, I show you some of them in this video. You're going to need multiple universal sockets. You're going to need a torque wrench that can go up to 74 foot-pounds for the flex plate. And so to do this job, you have to remove the transmission. In a previous video, I show you how to remove the transmission. In this video, we're only going to talk about the upper oil pan. So once you've taken that out, I will show you right now what it's going to take to do that job. All right, 2011 6.7 Powerstroke upper oil pan leak. So you can see what this thing looks like. It's leaking all over here. Got the lower pan is completely covered in oil. Upper pan, what happens is it leaks down, gets thrown around by the flex plate, and it leaks all over. So first step, remove transmission. I'll have a separate video for that. Basically, we got to take out the flex plate. The flex plate, there's a dowel right there. You got to make sure that you get that lined up when you put it back. Make sure you clean up your flex plate when you're all done. So here's what it looks like. I haven't taken anything apart. All right, so the things that we need to do is we need to disconnect this transmission, this coolant hose here to the oil cooler. We're gonna take off this lower oil pan because there's, I think, 8 or 10 bolts up through the lower oil pan into the upper oil pan. You have this coolant hose right here. We're gonna pop that clip out and take this off. I recommend you replace that. Anytime your upper oil pan is leaking, that hose is completely engulfed in oil and it sits right along the pan. So take it out, replace it. You gotta take it off anyways, so just replace it. If you don't, you better at least replace the seal inside this plastic end of the hose, otherwise it'll leak. Okay, so we're going to, right up in the front, up here, it's gonna be hard to see. There's a nut there, and then there's a nut on the other side over here that hold this wire harness up to the oil pan. Then you're gonna take the studs out of that. There's a stud here, you're gonna take that stud out. This is for the transmission cooler lines, you're gonna take that out. And then up inside this frame here is another nut holding this wiring harness up to the oil pan. You got to get that nut out. There's the other end of the coolant hose from the front that we're going to take off, so we're going to take that off and then fish that hose out of there. Then you got to take this oil cooler off. Now, early and late models are different. Some of them are only bolts on the outside perimeter. Some of them have a nut and a stud that goes through the lower oil pan. So before you touch that oil cooler, take off your lower oil pan and look up in there and make sure if there's a stud or not. If you don't, you'll bend it and you'll have to replace it. I'm replacing the oil cooler because it's all leaking. And then from there, basically you just have to undo all the perimeter bolts. And there's a lot of them. All right, I'll show you as we go. Upper oil pan. Okay, so right up in the front, there's a stud that goes right there and a stud that goes right there. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to, right here, the fan shroud, right there, there's a nut there, a 13mm nut and a 13mm nut right there. Take those off so you can pull this fan shroud forward so you can get this harness to pull forward so you have room to move it, okay? Back here, about in the center of this brace here, there's a stud sticking out the side of the block. Let me see if I can show you. Okay, that stud right there. Okay, so you got to get the harness off of that stud, then you can move it and pull it around to the front. And then pretty much it's just unbolting all the bolts on the oil pan. So I still have to take the flywheel off. So on this one, I said that sometimes there is a stud that sticks through the oil pan. On this one, there is a stud sticking through. So the nut is on the inside, and it's a 13mm nut. And then there's like 5 or 6 just regular 8mm bolts around the perimeter. Take all those off, you get that off, and you can get through that opening right there, you can get most of the hard bolts on the driver's side off, and through that hole right there, you can get 2 of the hard bolts on the passenger side. The other hard one is that bolt that's left right there in the middle, and I'm going to put a wobble with a cordless ratchet in there and get that off. And then you just have these perimeter bolts here, and there's like 6 of them in here. There's one right there. So you take all those off, and this oil pan's going to come off. The pickup tube stays with the oil pan. So let's get this flywheel off, and let's finish getting this oil pan off. It's coming off a lot better than I thought. All right, pan's off. It's in the parts washer. So now we got to clean all this up. There's a decent amount of room in there to clean up. I recommend that if you're going to do this, get it off one day and then let it drip all night. So that way all the runs run off. It's a gasket, so I mean, it's not super pertinent. You have silicone right here at the corners, at the front, at the rear. I don't think there's anything at the front. Maybe the front. Anyways, just a dab of silicone here and there, and all the rest is a gasket. So we're gonna clean all this up, do a rear main. So this plate right here comes off. This plate is just the pickup for the crank sensor. So you gotta take that off, and then take the rear main out. So I gotta get that out and get everything clean. And tomorrow, reassemble. All right, so one last tip is that the Ford plastic pan is garbage. So the one that I had done already had a metal pan on it, and the metal pan is silicone, RTV. So here's a pan here. We're just gonna put a Dorman one on. We got a bolt kit coming from Ford. I believe Ford sells a metal pan as well. Their replacement part for that oil pan is a metal pan. So you gotta have new bolts. The plastic oil pan bolts will not work with this. So this is just RTV, use Ford Motorcraft stuff, won't leak, be good to go. Let's get it. Okay, so if you're doing this job here, you're definitely gonna wanna do the rear main seal. You don't wanna pull it back apart. So here's a little tech tip that I've seen online. I've never tried it and it worked great. Drill a hole in the metal part of the rear main seal and then run a screw in there, and then you can grab it with some, I grabbed it with some angled needle nose pliers and propped it right out. So there you go. That's how you do it. You hear it straight from Nuts and Bolts with Tone that this works. Just make sure that you get your drill centered and your screw centered so you don't jack up the crankshaft or the sealing surface. There you go. Okay, so for cleaning up this engine, what I like to use right here is these Scotch-Brite pads. Just cut these up into squares and spray them with brake clean and just keep scrubbing. Keep spraying. As long as you keep brake clean on there, it'll work great. I'll use like 3 or 4 little squares. I'll clean this whole engine up. Scotch-Brite pad, let's get it. Okay, here we go. I've been super busy. I keep getting pulled off of stuff. So basically what you want to do is you want to try to get all this cleaned up the best you can. You want to spray down the walls of the block really, really well, so that way you can see right there, that wall right there, there's no oil running down. You want to make sure that you get that really, really clean. And right there where the aluminum meets the cast iron, okay, you're going to put a silicone there, and also right there. So, and that's on the front and the back. You're gonna run a gasket on. This is a gasket. I know some of them have, some of them use all silicone. I'm not sure if it's the newer ones. All the ones I've done have been all gaskets. So you're gonna have 4 dabs of silicone. And you can tell right here where that square is, that's where the silicone's gonna be. Right there. So make sure you get this thing really clean. and get this gasket popped in. I go ahead and put all the oil cooler gaskets on while it's off the car. It's easier. Clean everything here. Get this thing dry as a bone. Get all your bolts clean. Now, here's a little tip. I like to use one of these. I have one of these. It's like a little plastic, like rubber, little tiny mallet. And I use this and I tap the gaskets in. Whenever I have those oil pan gaskets, those oil cooler gaskets, water pumps on 7.3s, all kinds of stuff. You want to try to make sure that you get that gasket popped in so it doesn't fold. So we got all that clean. You can see here, for the most part, I don't have a lot of oil running down. I just sprayed it again. I sprayed it last night, it was all good. And then obviously today, you know, it's running down and it's almost lunchtime, so I'm gonna have to spray it again. But, oh, and right here at the back, right here where the aluminum, so basically where the rear engine cover and the block meet on both sides, and then also on the front where the timing cover meets the block, the front cover. And that's it. And then you're gonna put this thing in and torque it down. Make sure that you're all ready to go. You don't want to take a chance on that silicone messing up and then have a friend. You gotta, these are a little tricky to get around going up through here. You'll have to have somebody from the front kind of help hold it up, and then pretty much just set it up in there, get 2 bolts going, and then hurry up and torque it. All right, time to get it on. Okay, so once you torque your upper pan on, all right, get your upper pan on. And remember, you took out the 2 studs here and here, and then you took one out right there for the cooler line. All right, so what you gotta do is you gotta get these 2 studs in and get this harness in place, and then come over up in here and get that harness up on the stud that's back in the middle of the oil pan. Once you get done with that, you gotta fish your hose, your coolant hose, back up through the oil pan, okay? Connect it to your oil cooler right there, okay? If you got a new one, it comes with a clamp. All you gotta do is pop it. So get your clamp, get your hose on your oil cooler and put your oil cooler in place, loosely fit it, get your hose connected on both ends, pop your clamp, then torque your oil cooler, all right? Now, if your truck has a plastic oil pan, you need to update it to the metal pan. Now this is a Dorman pan, but if you get a Dorman pan, you have to buy new bolts from Ford. If you buy a Ford pan, it comes with bolts. So this is the Dorman pan with the Ford bolts in there. This is all torqued on. Now the oil cooler, this oil cooler originally had a stud going through the block, through the upper oil pan. The replacement oil cooler does not have a stud, so it bolts on externally. So make sure that if you are replacing it, make sure you don't have a stud, because if you do, you can't put this lower pan on until it's torqued. Then you got to make sure that you connect your coolant hose there to your oil cooler, and then that's about it. And then you're ready to put the transmission back in. All right, let's get this done. Okay, so when you're doing the rear main seal, you want to make sure that you have, it'll mostly slide right in. It requires oil on the outside of the seal and the inside of the seal. So rub it around on the crank, on the actual crank, and then on the outside of the seal. It'll come with a plastic sleeve that it sits on. Put that plastic sleeve on the crank, slip your rear main on. You can push it most of the way in with a bearing punch, and then you can just tap it the rest of the way in. It's really easy to get in. It's not difficult at all. So I hope this video was informative for you. I hope that if you had been leery of doing an upper oil pan on a 6.7 Powerstroke, that this helps you gain confidence in doing this job, and also the little tips and tricks that I showed you along the way to help aid you in this job, to doing it once, doing it right the first time, and making some money while you're doing it. Doing it faster than book time, hey, that's great. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell. You get notified of all my future content, which you're definitely going to want to see. Also check me out on Instagram at Nuts and Bolts with Tone for the daily life as a mechanic, show you how to use tools, show you what tools not to use, and I show you good tool companies and good tools that work for me. Thank you for watching the video. I'll see you next time.